We have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. Good morning, Dr. John.
Yeah, good morning, Mick.
It's great to have you back after missing you last week. It was, it's sad when we miss you, Dr. John.
Well, look, I got quite a few phone calls from friends, Mick, who said, "Where were you?" And I have to apologise. I wasn't able to make the program last week, but at least I know that there's a couple of people listening, Mick. Don't know how many there are, but a couple of friends said they missed me, so at least that's encouraging, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I got a few messages here too.
Right, okay. Oh, well, that's good. So at least we know there are probably a handful or so of people who regularly listen.
I think there's plenty.
When we were on last time, Mick, we talked about a listener's question that came in about the image of God. And we talked about what it meant to be created in his image. And I mentioned that maybe originally Adam and Eve, although they didn't have any clothes on, they were not aware of their nakedness because they probably looked a bit like Jesus did on the Mount of Transfiguration. You know, they were clothed with the glory of God.
Yeah.
So, it would have been very interesting to see them. And the good news is, Mick, that one day we'll be back to that state, which will be quite fantastic, won't it?
Yes. And I'll be able to say, oh, your skin's glowing today, Dr. John.
Yeah, but I probably won't be starkers. So Jesus had clothes on the Mount of Transfiguration, even though his face was shining.
Uh-huh.
So I think we'll probably be in that sort of state. But look, after that we got on to the discovery of a bit of rock art in India, you might remember.
Yep.
And we said that rock art featured the first evidence of kangaroos being in existence outside Australia. Mm-hmm. And, we only have kangaroos in Australia now, tree kangaroos in PNG and Indonesia as well. But really, that's fantastic that they were discovered in rock art in India. And I have to say, and I think I mentioned last time, that was one of my personal big issues before I became a Christian. Mm-hmm. I used to say to my wife, how did the kangaroos get to Australia if all the animals were wiped out on Noah's Ark? You know, scoffingly like that. But once I became a Christian, it was absolutely no problem to me. I realised that, God did it somehow. And I then, when I got involved with the creation ministry type people, I discovered that the surviving animals would have dispersed on the land bridges that were there after the flood, because the ice age came after the flood. That lowered the water levels, and animals were able to walk around the earth much more easily than they can now. Mm-hmm. And, of course, one of the things that's been frequently observed is how animals can travel around on log mats. That's been observed plenty of times in recent years, and we know that there would have been a lot of log mats and things after the flood. So that all of that would have helped animals to disperse over the earth. And then, of course, diversification into species would have occurred then after they got isolated in their various environments. Mm-hmm. And I thought a classic example of that is polar bears, because all the big bears can readily interbreed, so they're all the one kind. They're all bears, yeah. But of course polar bears have got that white fur.
Yes,
so they got that because of where they were isolated up there in the polar regions, and but they are just bears. And they can interbreed with grizzly bears and the big Alaskan brown bears. So, I think we can say that there's plenty of reason why the diversification would have occurred later on after they dispersed. And a good example of that, we don't really know exactly how many pairs of the various animals were there on the ark with Noah. We know that there was only one pair of unclean animals, but there were either 7 or 7 pairs of what they call clean animals, and we can't really be sure what those clean animals are. But of the unclean animals, obviously, pigs were definitely known as unclean animals,
Yep.
but even they've diversified into domestic pigs and wild pigs, peccaries, warthogs, things like that. So there's plenty of breeds of pigs around the world. We don't know whether dogs were regarded as unclean animals either. But, we see all different types of dogs, and they all came from the one wolf kind as far as we know. So there you go. There's a lot of things that only make sense, actually, after you read the Bible and see what really did happen.
Absolutely. We've got Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. And, interesting, Dr. John. There's been some interesting stories in the news over the last week as well, Dr. John.
Look, I saw a fantastic one, and of course it all comes back to the dating systems that are used. I mean, those the kangaroo art in India, the researchers thought it was about 12,000 years old, but we say it's probably more likely about 4.
Yep.
But this was a wonderful story about a couple of cave lion cubs that they found in permafrost in Siberia.
Yes.
Now, cave lions are a breed of lion, and they found this female cub that was so perfectly preserved that they could even count its whiskers. And I think you mentioned earlier, Mick, even traces of its mother's milk
Yes.
were found in it.
Mm.
So, and yet they dated it at 28,000 years old.
Yeah.
So maybe the milk had curdled a little bit by then. I'm not sure, Mick. But look, there was another cub found, though. That was a female cub they found, but only 15 metres away in the same sort of permafrost, they found another one, a male cub. And they looked to be exactly the same and almost certainly appeared to be from the one litter. So, brother and sister. Mm-hmm. And yet they dated the female one at 28,000 years old, but the male one they dated at 42,000 years old.
Yep.
So there they are, very obviously found in the same type of frost, almost certainly brother and sister from the same litter, and yet one dates by radiocarbon dating at 28,000 years old, and the other at 42,000.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about this many times, and I just have to emphasise again how you really cannot take any notice of those huge dates that get bandied around all the time. Carbon dating is not reliable. We've talked about that many times on the program, and here we have a classic example of, 15 metres apart. Let's face it, that's pretty close.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And here we go. They are obviously brother and sister, a male and female cub, but they date with a 14,000 year difference.
Absolutely.
So
and I've seen the pictures. They even look the same. Same size, same age, and everything. When they were obviously covered up with ice.
Yeah, well, there you go. And actually, nobody knows where that ice came from either, because it's just like all the frozen mammoths. Something snap froze animals like that, and it's not as if it's an area where there's heaps of cave lions. They just happen to find these 2 cubs that were snap frozen. So there you go, Mick. It really does mean that. Your believability is really strained to the limits when you find those sorts of things things that are obviously from the same litter can date at such a different time frame.
Absolutely, yeah, from the same cave. And we have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. And of course, Dr. John, you guys have a website, creation.com, where people can go to, not just get questions answered, which is what we often say. Just go there and get all your questions answered, because there's a lot of answers in there to different questions. But of course, every week they publish news stories, so you can see news stories about stuff that's going on at the moment and other interesting articles. And of course, we'd like people with questions, of course, to send us a text message on 0401949949, and we can answer some of the questions on air. But I believe you've had a look at a couple of the stories online, Dr. John.
Yeah, look, a couple of the articles in on the Creation website recently, and one of them was about oil. Mm-hmm. And this was a reprint from an article that had appeared in the magazine a few years ago. And it sort of relates to what we're talking about these long ages. You know, people think that coal and oil have taken millions of years to form and all of this sort of stuff, and they're that age. Mm-hmm. And yet, this was an article about researchers who'd managed to produce oil from green algae in less than an hour. I mean, that's not bad, is it? Less than an hour, hardly a million years or two.
Well, but, I know when I was an exchange student, Dr. John, back in it was the 80s, I went to South Africa, and they couldn't get any oil from anybody around the world because of the apartheid, and so they were actually converting coal into oil.
Yeah, that'd be right. But, I mean, coal, of course, was already there, and so was this. But this was green algae, fresh stuff. Anyway, they were able to make oil out of it, and all they used was high temperatures, but not that high, 350 degrees Celsius, which, you know, your domestic oven will get up to there pretty readily, and about 3,000 psi. So a fair bit of pressure, but they produced oil in less than an hour. And the oil was able to be fractionated into aviation fuel and diesel and natural gas, just like the oil you get out of oil wells. So the idea of oil taking millions of years to form is just nonsense. You know, all you really need is the right conditions of temperature and pressure, and you can form it from vegetation.
In no time.
We know that there was heaps of vegetation uprooted in the flood, and that's probably where all our oil has come from, of course, because it's been subjected to high pressures and high temperatures, and really. Probably a lot of the oil, I mean, you remember years ago they used to worry about the oil running out.
Yep.
Well, nobody wants to use it anymore, and certainly not the coal that it might have come from. But the oil is probably still forming. So, you know, the world's reserves of oil keep going up a little bit because it's still forming. But look, and in Bass Strait, the oil in Bass Strait has probably come from the brown coal in Gippsland in Victoria.
Yes.
So really, it's pretty interesting and quite amazing that you don't have to have these long ages that people are talking about.
And also, Dr. John, I was just thinking as you were saying that. You know, you speak about after the flood that there was an ice age, and people are probably thinking, well, then where did the heat come from? I know from, going skiing in different parts of the world, particularly in Canada, and I know it's the same in Japan. You can be in ski resorts where you've got, deep snow outside, very cold temperatures, and you can walk down the road to hot baths where the water is coming up out of the ground from not that deep, and it is, well, in some areas it's too hot and they actually have to cool it into the pools that people go swimming in.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's because of the geography of the Earth. And although there was an ice age up in the northern latitudes, the fact is the temperature and pressure that you get with compression is pretty high, and that's really where all the oil came from. But look, I was quite amused, and this is my lead into what I was going to talk about earlier. You might have seen the report that came out about the origin of the coronavirus, because you might remember that the Biden administration said in 90 days they were going to give an announcement as to where the virus had actually come from. And that report was released last week, and they couldn't say.
Yes.
Right, so they couldn't determine whether it had actually come from the wet market or whether it had come from the laboratory. And it reminded me actually of Jesus when he asked the Pharisees about John the Baptist. He said, what did you think of John the Baptist? And they thought to themselves, and they thought, well, we can't say he wasn't a prophet because the people think he was, and they'll stone us if we say he wasn't a prophet. And we can't say that he actually came from God, because then Jesus will say to us, why didn't you believe him? So they said, well, look, we don't know. And that reminded that I thought that was a similar answer. They couldn't say that the virus had come from the wet market, because a lot of people say, oh, you're just covering up. And we can't say it came from the Wuhan laboratory, because we'll get the Chinese angry. So we have to say we don't know.
And I guess what we have to get out of that, Dr. John, is not to judge, because we don't know either. And too often you see people locally, they want to judge someone or the other, saying, it was this, it was that. But the bottom line is, we don't know.
Yeah. There are plenty of things we don't know. But I thought it was interesting using that as an example, because there are lots of research things going on in laboratories around the world that are pretty terrifying, I reckon, and people should be aware of it, that the sort of Frankensteinian experiments and things that are happening in the world would probably make your hair curl.
Yes.
And some of the adults listening, I would strongly recommend that you go and have a look at an article on the creation.com website that we published only last week on August the 26th. And this is about some research in America from the University of Pittsburgh. And some of the experiments that they were doing, and some of the tests and whatever on aborted fetuses would really make your hair curl. And I just encourage people to go and read that, because if you're a Christian, I think you would find that that's very, very abhorrent. But we won't go into details, but I'll encourage people to go and read that article, 26th of August, on the creation.website.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions for Dr. John, please send them through to our question line, or it is an SMS line, a text line, 0401 949 949. And we have Dr. John on the line from Creation Ministries International. Had very interesting chats this morning, and I believe we should also talk about something that was in the news over the last week, Dr. John, in Science Alert in particular, and I know it's been talked about in other media publications as well. And that headline was, more and more humans are growing an extra artery, showing that we're still evolving.
Yeah, it's. I saw that article, Mick, and of course, people reading it might think, "Gee, yeah, well, there's an example of evolution in action," but of course it isn't. And that extra artery that they're talking about, we have two main arteries in our arms at the moment, in our forearms: the median artery and the radial artery. And this third one seems to, ulnar artery and radial artery, and this third one seems to have persisted in a lot of people, and apparently more and more people are being born with it. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that during development, everybody develops the three, but the middle one regresses because it's not needed. And we find that with a lot of things that happen in utero as the baby's developing, because the fetal circulation is quite different from the circulation when the baby is out of the womb. Mm-hmm. And there are other things like the communication channels between the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart, and between the arterial circulation and venous circulation, that have to close off after the baby's born, because there's a totally different requirement when you're living in air than when you're living in the womb. And so when those things don't happen, they don't close off properly, that's actually damaging to the child. A patent ductus arteriosus, or communication between the right heart and the left heart, what people call a hole in the heart.
Yep.
These things are not good for you. And I actually had a bit of a thought about that article, and I wondered if the people with that extra artery are actually not quite as robust as those who don't have it. And we know that with modern medicine and so on, people are surviving things that they would not have survived back in the distant past. Mm. So it's very possible that a lot of those people who are born with it and retain it are the progeny of those who have survived because of modern medicine. So that's why the percentage of it might be appearing greater in the population these days. I mean, that's speculation, but when you start seeing things like that, it's not evolution, because evolution requires upward progress, greater information, more robust, and so on. Whereas it's very probably the opposite. It's actually devolution and the persistence of things that really shouldn't be there. So, no, anybody who saw that article, although the media might tout it as an example of evolution in action, it really isn't. It's an example of devolution, if anything.
Yeah. When I read the article, I was sort of thinking, well, the information was already there. If we all have it when we're, basically in the womb, we have this particular artery running through. And, yeah, even though it's sort of, I guess, dies off, whatever you call it, gets smaller, shrinks away. The fact that it stays is not saying that anything's evolved. It's just saying, hey, it's just not shrinking like it used to, but it's still there. The cut-off mechanism hasn't occurred. Mm.
The self-correcting mechanism that is supposed to be there isn't occurring. Mm. So it's really a disadvantage rather than an advantage.
Very interesting. Well, Dr. John, I think our time's almost up today. Will you be here next week?
I'll be here next week, Mick. God willing.
God willing, yes.
And I trust that he does will. Yes. So I'll be here next week, Mick, and hopefully we won't have to do any missing like we did last week.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, we're still getting questions from people about COVID questions. We'd prefer not to get them at the moment. Just go by the health advice that you hear, and of course pray about all the decisions that you make. That's the best we can give you at this stage as far as COVID's concerned. However, any other questions to do with evolution, to do with creation, please send your questions through to our text line. That's 0401 949 949. 0401 949 949. Thank you again, Dr. John.
Good on you, Mick, and thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. See you later.